What happens when an HOA president treats her neighbor's boat like it's her own and freezes when the Coast Guard shines a light in her face? Blue and red lights tore across the black surface of the bay, cutting through laughter and music in an instant. The thump of bass from a portable speaker died out as someone fumbled to silence it, and for a moment, all that could be heard was the low roar of the Coast Guard's motor closing in. Cynthia Weller stood at the wheel of the boat, her hands trembling, her throat tight. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't prepared for this. And now, in front of a dozen tipsy friends, she was about to be exposed. "Kill the music," one of the men muttered sharply, grabbing at a beer can and tossing it overboard. Another guest whispered, "Are they coming straight for us?" The question didn't need an answer. Every pair of eyes on that deck was already glued to the approaching lights. "Good evening, folks," a Coast Guard officer's voice rang out, steady and commanding. "Cut the engine and prepare for inspection." Cynthia froze. She wasn't licensed to operate this boat. She wasn't even supposed to be on it. Her heart pounded as she fumbled with the controls, her movements clumsy and loud in the silence. The officer's beam of light swept across the deck, catching faces that suddenly looked less like party guests and more like accomplices. "What's the problem, officer?" Cynthia called out, her voice thinner than she intended. "Noise complaints," the officer replied flatly, "and a vessel operating without proper lights." "Ma'am, this your boat?" That single question hung in the night, air like a guillotine. Cynthia felt her knees weaken. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Around her, the laughter and arrogance of the evening evaporated, replaced by a suffocating stillness. Someone coughed. A guest muttered, "Say something." But Cynthia's lips wouldn't form the lie she had rehearsed in her head. The officer's flashlight stopped squarely on her, waiting. The Coast Guard boat pulled closer, its presence looming. "Ma'am, I'll ask again. Are you the registered owner of this vessel?" Every fiber of Cynthia's body screamed for her to answer, but she was paralyzed. The friends who had cheered her on an hour earlier now looked down, silent, as if refusing to be connected to whatever trouble was about to land. The boat rocked slightly in the water, and with it, Cynthia's sense of control slipped away completely. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had imagined laughter carrying over the waves, a sense of authority, a belonging, of being admired. Instead, here she was, cornered under harsh lights, her authority melting into humiliation. "Ma'am, we need proof of registration," the officer said again, his tone sharpening. "If you're not the owner, you'll need to explain why you're operating this vessel." Cynthia swallowed hard. She could feel her throat drying up, her palms slick with sweat. She thought of Darnell Cooper, his name printed on the documents, his careful way of polishing this boat every Saturday morning, his pride in owning something. So sleek. He was in Atlanta, far from here, probably laughing with family over dinner, and she was on his boat, surrounded by incriminating stares. About to be dragged into a mess of her own making. Her mind scrambled for a way out. Maybe she could say she borrowed it with permission. Maybe she could bluff. But with the Coast Guard's light burning into her eyes, the weight of authority pressing down, Cynthia couldn't summon a single convincing word. The silence stretched. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The officer finally broke it. "All right, ma'am, cut the engine now. We'll handle this properly." The words struck Cynthia like a sentence being read aloud in court. She fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them, before the engine finally went quiet. The water lapped against the hull in the sudden stillness, amplifying every shallow breath she took. Her guests avoided her gaze, and one by one they seemed to fold in on themselves, realizing this night wasn't ending in laughter, but in reports, paperwork, and possible charges. The Coast Guard officers secured the boat, stepping aboard with an authority that no one dared to challenge. Cynthia's eyes darted between their stern expressions and the scattered empties rolling across the deck. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had crossed the line, and now she was trapped on the wrong side of it. But this wasn't the beginning of her fall. It was the moment her choices caught up with her, and it all started long before the flashing. Lights appeared on the water, but before the Coast Guard stop turned her night into a public humiliation. The story began with a neighborhood, a new HOA president, and a temptation that refused to stay quiet. 2 days earlier, the neighborhood along Mission Bay in San Diego looked like the picture of order. Houses with sharp lines and manicured lawns stood in neat rows, their trimmed hedges and polished driveways giving off a sense of quiet pride. This wasn't the sort of place where drama usually spilled out into the open. But behind closed doors, the Homeowners Association, the HOA, was its own battlefield. At the head of it all now sat Cynthia Weller, 47 years old, sharp blazer, always pressed. Hair tied back in a way that said she wanted control of everything she touched. Cynthia hadn't lived in the neighborhood long, but she had a knack for convincing people she was the most competent person in the room. When elections rolled around that spring, she beat out a long-standing board member and claimed the president seat with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Neighbors described her as ambitious. Others, less politely, said she enjoyed authority too much. She organized meetings with rigid schedules, enforced rules with sudden strictness, and gave the impression that she, not the collective residents, was the one calling the shots. Across the street lived Darnell Cooper, 42, a software engineer who had been in the neighborhood for nearly a decade. Where Cynthia was loud and always pushing, Darnell was steady. He didn't say much at HOA meetings, but when he did, his words carried weight. He wasn't the kind to show off, but his boat, docked proudly in the marina just 5 minutes away, caught attention on its own. A sleek white Sea Ray Sundancer polished weekly until it gleamed like new. Other boat owners at the marina often asked him for maintenance tips, and he gladly shared. Darnell worked hard for what he had. Weekdays were long. Hours in front of multiple monitors, fixing code and troubleshooting problems that would have fried someone else's patience. Weekends were his respite, cleaning the boat, taking it out on the bay, sometimes inviting close friends for a quiet ride. For him, the boat wasn't just a luxury. It was a reward, a piece of stability. That week, though, he wasn't in San Diego. He had packed a bag, locked up his home, and driven to the airport for a flight to Atlanta, where his parents lived. It was his mother's birthday, and missing it wasn't an option. He left confident everything at home would stay safe, the way it always had. And then there was Cynthia. The HOA president had noticed Darnell's boat plenty of times before. From her own yard, she could see him hitching up gear, checking the engine, wiping down surfaces until they shone. She never said it out loud, but her envy was obvious. At gatherings, her comments carried a sharp edge. "That's quite the toy you've got there, Darnell," she once remarked, her tone halfway between admiration and criticism, when she learned through neighborhood gossip that Darnell would be gone for the weekend. Something in her clicked. She had responsibilities, yes, but the thought of responsibility melted into something else: temptation. The marina security wasn't airtight. Residents often strolled in and out, and as HOA president, she believed she carried a certain untouchable authority. If anyone questioned her, she could flash a confident smile and explain it away. Still, temptation needed a push. That came in the form of her friend Margot Bell, a lively woman with a mischievous streak who always encouraged Cynthia's bold ideas. One glass of wine too many on Friday afternoon, and Margot leaned in with a grin. "Why don't we take that boat out, just for fun? He'll never know." Cynthia laughed at first, but her mind didn't let it go. She thought about how people looked at her in meetings, half admiring, half suspicious. She thought about the power of being seen not just as the HOA president, but as someone who owned the night. And suddenly, the idea of steering Darnell's prize boat across the bay while people laughed and cheered around her felt irresistible. By Saturday afternoon, she had made her decision. She gathered a small circle of friends, people who were always ready for a thrill and never the type to ask too many questions. "Bring drinks," she instructed. "We'll head out after dark. It'll be easier then." The plan was reckless, but it had a dangerous logic to it. In her mind, she wasn't stealing. She was borrowing. Just a few hours, just one night. Darnell would never know. But temptation, once fed, never stays small. And what Cynthia saw as a harmless indulgence was about to turn into something far more humiliating than she could have imagined. But before Cynthia's bold plan played out on the open water, she first had to convince herself and her friends that sneaking onto that boat was nothing more than a little harmless fun. By the time Saturday evening rolled around, the marina in Mission Bay was alive in its own quiet way. Families returning from day trips cleaned coolers on the docks. Children carried half-deflated rafts to the parking lot, and boat owners tied down their vessels for the night. The air smelled of salt, sunscreen, and barbecue smoke drifting over from the nearby park. For most, it was just another summer weekend. For Cynthia Weller, though, it was the night she had decided to blur the line between envy and entitlement. She had spent the afternoon pacing her living room, convincing herself this wasn't as outrageous as it sounded. "It's just a boat ride," she muttered more than once, sipping nervously from a glass of Chardonnay. The title of HOA president sat heavy on her shoulders, but not in the way one might expect. Instead of responsibility, she felt emboldened, almost protected. Who would dare accuse her of wrongdoing? She was the one neighbors answered to about lawn violations and parking disputes. She had authority, or at least she thought she did. Margot Bell, perched on the couch with her sandals kicked off, gave her the last push she needed. "You've been talking about it all day," Margot teased, swirling ice in her glass. "Either you're going to do it, or you're going to sit here regretting it while someone else is having all the fun." Cynthia smirked, though her nerves made the expression twitch at the edges. "We'll keep it small," she said finally. "Just a handful of us. One ride, a little music. Nothing wild. Nothing wild." Margot laughed. "On that boat? Come on, Cynthia. You don't borrow a luxury car and keep it parked in the driveway. You take it out and let people see you in it." That line sank in deep. It wasn't just about the ride. It was about being seen. For Cynthia, admiration had always been a quiet hunger. When she walked through the neighborhood, she noticed glances. She lived for them. Tonight, she wanted more than polite smiles. She wanted attention. Envy, whispers about how she must be. Living larger than anyone realized, by sunset, the group had formed. Along with Margot came her younger cousin, a wiry 20-something named Troy with more bravado than sense, and two others from Cynthia's social circle, Janet and Roland, both known for enjoying nights that pushed boundaries. They gathered in Cynthia's driveway, voices hushed but giddy, as if they were planning something half illegal, half thrilling. As they walked toward the marina, Cynthia rehearsed the lines she might use if someone questioned them. "Darnell let me take it out while he's gone. I'm just keeping it safe." But no matter how many times she practiced, the excuses sounded flimsy, stitched together with thin thread. Still, the gate at the marina clicked open under her keycard access provided by her HOA roll, not her own. Membership hand, that sound erased hesitation. They walked down the dock, the wood planks creaking under their steps, until the Sea Ray Sundancer came into view. The boat shimmered faintly in the dim lights along the pier, spotless as always. Darnell's pride radiated from every polished surface. Cynthia paused, staring at it, and for a fleeting moment, guilt flared. She could picture him bent over this very deck, wiping it down with care. "You freezing up?" Troy asked, smirking. "No," Cynthia snapped, just taking it in. "You don't rush into moments like this." Janet whistled low. "He keeps it cleaner than my kitchen. You sure he's not going to notice?" "He won't," Cynthia replied, though her tone was sharper than intended. "We'll be careful." One by one, they climbed aboard. The deck lights flicked on, soft and inviting, and the cabin below smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Margot's laughter broke the tension. "Well, look at you, Captain Cynthia. Feels natural, doesn't it?" Cynthia gripped the wheel, pretending a confidence she didn't feel. She didn't know the first thing about maritime controls, but pride wouldn't let her admit it. "Of course it does," she lied smoothly. "Now help me untie us." With Troy fumbling at the ropes and Roland fiddling with the speaker, the boat shuddered, then eased away from the dock. Cynthia's chest swelled with a rush she hadn't felt in years. As the marina lights grew smaller, she could almost believe it was hers. The boat, the night, the admiring eyes of her companions. "Turn up the music," Margot shouted, her hair whipping in the breeze. A bass-heavy track filled the air, carrying across the water. Cynthia laughed then, too loud, too wild, and for a while. She forgot the weight of risk entirely. But temptation doesn't stop growing once you feed it. The boat cut deeper into the bay, music blaring, voices rising until the sound carried back to shore and into the ears of neighbors who knew very well that Darnell Cooper was hundreds of miles away. But while Cynthia basked in the thrill of playing captain, word was already spreading along the marina that something didn't look right, and trouble had a way of finding its way onto the water. By the time the boat cleared the marina, the bay opened wide in front of them like an invitation. The sun had dipped fully below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange fading into purple. The air cooled, but the energy on the deck only heated up. Cynthia stood tall behind the wheel, her back straighter than usual, chin slightly raised. To anyone watching, she might have looked like she belonged there. To herself, she felt like she was balancing on the edge of a cliff, terrified and exhilarated all at once. "Turn it louder," Troy yelled, already on his third beer. He waved his arms in the air like they were at a concert, not on stolen property. The speaker thumped, bass bouncing across the water. Roland leaned against the railing, his phone out. "This is insane," he said, though his grin betrayed no worry. "I'm posting this." Cynthia spun on him so quickly the boat rocked. "You are not," she snapped. "No photos, no videos, not one." Roland held up his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. You're the boss, Captain." Her title dripped with sarcasm, but Cynthia clung to it anyway. Captain, yes, that's what she was. Tonight, Margot, always the instigator, tossed her sandals aside and danced barefoot across the deck. "Loosen up, Cyn. Look at you. Running the HOA by day, running the bay by night. Tell me that doesn't feel good." Cynthia's laugh was sharp but genuine this time. It did feel good. Too good. The rhythm of the waves beneath her, the sound of her friends cheering it, created a heady mix. She imagined the other homeowners seeing her now, not as a rule enforcer, but as someone untouchable. Someone they'd gossip about in admiration. Janet sipped from a plastic cup, her tone more cautious. "You sure you know what you're doing? Boats aren't cars. If the Coast Guard sees us, they won't." Cynthia cut her off quickly. "Relax, we're not hurting anyone. Just a little ride, nothing more." But her words sounded thinner than she intended. Because even as she said them, she knew this wasn't just a little ride. She was risking more than her reputation. She was risking exposure, humiliation, maybe worse. The group didn't notice how far they had already gone. The marina was a cluster of distant lights now, and their laughter carried freely across the bay. A passing kayak slowed, its paddler frowning at the blaring music. "Keep it down." he shouted. Troy leaned over the railing and hollered back, "Mind your own business." His voice echoed, and laughter followed. Cynthia forced a smile, but inside, her stomach tightened. Encounters like that could bring attention, and attention wasn't what she needed. Not from strangers who didn't know the plan. It's not from anyone who might remember the sight of her at the wheel. Still, the show had to go on. She grabbed the throttle with one hand, steadying the wheel with the other, and pushed them farther out. The boat surged, splitting the water, sending cheers across the deck. For a few fleeting moments, the doubt in her mind dulled beneath the adrenaline. Janet edged closer, voice low enough only Cynthia could hear. "I'm serious, Cyn. This could go bad fast. You sure you want to keep going?" Cynthia didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the horizon, but her thoughts were tangled. Every part of her wanted to keep pressing forward, to cling to the power she rarely felt in her day-to-day life. Being HOA president gave her a title, yes, but not this. This raw sense of ownership, of command. Finally, she looked at Janet and forced a smirk. "When's the last time you felt alive, Janet? Really alive?" "Tonight, that's what this is." Janet studied her for a long moment, then stepped back, muttering, "Don't say I didn't warn you." The music pulsed again. Glasses clinked. Laughter filled the deck. To anyone watching from the shore, it looked like a party in full swing. To Cynthia, it was validation. For once, she wasn't the woman neighbors whispered about behind closed doors. She was the one at the center of it all. But the water has a way of carrying noise. And while Cynthia reveled in the image she had built, the sound of their celebration drifted toward the coastline. Windows slid open in waterfront condos, annoyed residents peering out. Phone calls were made, complaints were logged. The wrong kind of attention was already moving in their direction. Back on the boat, Cynthia took another drink and smiled as if the night was hers to command. She didn't know that somewhere on shore, a Coast Guard crew was already preparing to check out a disturbance on the bay. But as the party carried on with reckless joy, the waves were already carrying whispers of trouble straight toward them. The Sundancer cut across the bay with a steady hum, its wake spreading in long white streaks behind it. From a distance, the vessel looked like any other weekend cruiser. But the sound pouring from its speakers told a different story. Music throbbed over the waves, laughter spilled into the night, and every so often, Troy's voice rose above the rest, loud and careless. Cynthia gripped the wheel tighter than she needed to. Her friends might have seen her grin, but inside, her nerves flickered. The throttle was slippery under her palm, and every jerk of the boat reminded her that she wasn't in control. The Sundancer cut across the bay with a steady hum, its wake spreading in long white streaks behind it. From a distance, the vessel looked like any other weekend cruiser, but the sound pouring from its speakers told a different story. Music throbbed over the waves, laughter spilled into the night, and every so often, Troy's voice rose above the rest, loud and careless. Cynthia gripped the wheel tighter than she needed to. Her friends might have seen her grin, but inside, her nerves flickered. The throttle was slippery under her palm, and every jerk of the boat reminded her that she wasn't in control. The initial rush of adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that the music couldn't drown out. The bay was vast and dark, and their little bubble of light and noise felt suddenly very small, very exposed. "Hey, Cynthia." Janet's voice was closer now, her hand on Cynthia's arm. The touch was not celebratory, it was anxious. "I think we should turn back. Seriously, it's getting late, and this feels wrong." "Janet's right," Roland added, his phone finally put away. He was looking not at Cynthia, but at the dark, empty water ahead. "We're way out. If something happens, ... Nothing is going to happen, Margot chirped, though her smile seemed forced. She topped off her glass from a nearly empty bottle. We're fine. Captain Cynthia has it under control. Don't you, Captain? Cynthia's mouth was dry. She nodded, a stiff mechanical motion. Of course, but her knuckles were white on the wheel. She had no idea how to read the navigation lights of a distant tanker, didn't know the right of way. She was just pointing the boat away from shore and pushing the throttle. It was Troy who saw them first. He was leaning over the stern, and his posture changed from slouching to ramrod straight. Guys? No one heard him over the music. Guys, he shouted, turning. His face was pale in the deck lights. Lights behind us. Big ones, moving fast. The laughter died. The thumping bass now sounded obnoxious and foolish. Oh, Cynthia's head snapped around. Two sets of lights, blue and red, were slicing through the darkness. Maybe half a mile back, but closing with terrifying speed. Kill the music. Someone, maybe Roland, yelled. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of their own engine and the growing roar of the Coast Guard vessel's motors. The lights tore across the black water, a silent, brutal accusation. Cynthia's mind went blank. Every rehearsed lie, every flimsy excuse evaporated. All that was left was a primal, paralyzing fear. Her hands began to tremble violently. Cut the engine and prepare for inspection. The voice that rang out was amplified, steady, and utterly commanding. It wasn't a request. Cynthia fumbled for the keys, her fingers numb and clumsy. The engine coughed and died, and the boat fell in two. A sickening, bobbing silence. The only sound was the water lapping against the hull, a sound that seemed to mock her earlier confidence. The Coast Guard cutter pulled alongside, its size making the Sundancer seem like a toy. Bright spotlights mounted on its deck snapped on, flooding them in a harsh, white glare. There was nowhere to hide. Every beer can, every empty bottle, every guilty expression was illuminated in stark detail. Two officers, their faces set in grim, professional lines, stepped aboard with an easy authority that made Cynthia's claim to captaincy feel like a child's game. One, a woman with her hair in a severe bun, began a methodical visual inspection of the vessel. The other, a tall man with a weathered face, focused on Cynthia. Good evening, folks. Noise complaints and a vessel operating without proper running lights. Ma'am, are you the registered owner of this vessel? The question hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. Cynthia's throat constricted. She opened her mouth, but only. A faint croak emerged. She could feel the eyes of her friends on her, not with support, but with a desperate, panicked hope that she would say the right thing and make this all go away, ma'am. The officer repeated, his tone hardening slightly. I need an answer. It's my friends, she finally managed, the words barely a whisper. Your friend's name. Darnell Cooper. Saying his name aloud felt like a betrayal. And is Mr. Cooper aboard this vessel tonight? No. Did Mr. Cooper grant you permission to operate his vessel? The silence was her answer. The officer's eyes scanned the deck, taking in the scene. The party guests frozen in place. The evidence of drinking, Cynthia's obvious inexperience. He didn't need to say anything else. The story was written plainly before him. Asterisk.